My name is Robert Joseph Williams. I'm 88 years of age. I am a former veteran, Navy veteran. I became inducted into the U.S. Navy in 1945, immediately after high school. I spent a year and a half in the military. I went in the military at the time. It was segregated. I was not a happy camper. I encountered numerous obstacles that I had to deal with. I would like to speak to the area that I was born in and give it thoughtful thanks and appreciation for the values that were instilled in me. As I mentioned earlier, if I did not, I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1927. The uniqueness about Tulsa, Oklahoma was that it was, at that time, the oil capital of the world. It was also unique in that it was labeled as the Black Wall Street of America. That label was attached because there were numerous blacks and Indians who had acquired ownership through property and economic well-being that was unlike any other city in America. Example, there were 4 black-owned theaters in Tulsa. There were grocery stores. You name it, there were banks. It was self-contained. It was supposed to have been separate but equal, but that was not the case. It was highly racist. This was a time when miscegenation was an attempt to be installed by Constitution. Miscegenation spoke to the illegal marriage of blacks and whites. Also, there was prohibition with regards to Indians and blacks marrying. But my grandparents were Choctaw Chickasha. They lived in Elmo City, Oklahoma. That's near Oklahoma City. My father, of course, was Choctaw Chickasha. I consider myself to be black and Native American. My mother was black. I come from a family of 4. I had 3 older sisters. My youngest sister was 10 years my senior. They were 2 years apart. So I grew up in a family that was a Christian family. That because of my father's Indian heritage, he was very hesitant about making positive commitments and reliances on Caucasians. And our values stemmed from our parents. My parents were Baptists, so I'm a Baptist. I made mention of my grandparents. My grandfather's name was Joseph Williams. My grandmother's name on my father's side was Mary Williams. They were Chickasha Choctaw Indians. I've been advised by them that they were a part of the Indian Removal Act that was enacted in Georgia in 1836, when all of the Indians in Georgia and several other states were told to leave Georgia and move to Oklahoma. Was a territory at that time. It was called the Trail of Tears, where many Indians died in an effort to reach Oklahoma. So in the area where my grandfather lived, there was a large oil well that had his name on it. Also, there was an effort to Christianize many of the Indians. That effort was to change their names. Their given name on my father's side was Wild Horse, and that name was not a Christian name. So there was a Bible of different names that you could choose from. And it just so happens that my parents, my grandparents or great-grandparents, chose the name Williams. That is recorded also in the archives. Other remembrances that I have of my parents and my grandparents in their mobility from the country to Tulsa. I mentioned earlier that I had 3 sisters who were older than myself. My youngest sister, Eugenia, finished high school at the age of 15. She was a very bright child. She was double promoted twice. She was among the first to be accepted in Kansas State Teachers College. This was an all-white school that my sister attended and went on to graduate from there with honors. I was not so fortunate academically, and I guess because of my displeasure with some of the racism that I encountered, I rebelled to a great extent. And although the educational link that was instituted in Tulsa was beneficial, we were advised and taught by an all-black staff, of course. But our black teachers were dedicated to making sure that we felt comfortable with who we were. Every Friday at assembly, we were told by our principal that we were just as good as everybody in the world and better than the other 10. With that attitude, I went into the military. I left Tulsa, Oklahoma, on a military train that was segregated. And the Navy was segregated, but it just so happened that I was in boot camp at San Diego, California. California had not at that time was integrated to a great extent. I was at Camp Decatur in San Diego. After boot camp, there was time, you spent 6 weeks in boot camp. And I'm recalling now among the most memorable events in my life when I went home on my first leave on a train again with the Caucasians and Indians and blacks. And within 35 miles of Tulsa, there had been a great rain, and the train had to stop because the bridge 35 miles from Tulsa, the water was so high we could not cross over the bridge. So we had to get off the train and wait in the depot until the water receded. And it just so happens that the blacks were all gathered together and the whites were gathered together. And there must have been about 30 or 35 black sailors. And an Indian came by, and for some reason he saw me and asked me to go with him along with the other black sailors. And we were all invited, just the blacks, to come to the Indian village. And we spent several hours with them, and they treated us royally. And we went back in time after the water had receded, and we moved on to our destination that was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That was a very memorable occasion for me. And it led me to believe, too, that there was some allegiance that they had, an identification that they had to black. My father's name was Benjamin Williams. My mother's name was Georgia Williams. It just so happens that my father was born in Oklahoma. My mother, Georgia, was born in Kaufman, Texas. I was never sure of my grandmother on my mother's side. I never was sure of her nationality. She was very fair. She could have been mixed, Caucasian, Indian, I'm not sure. I know that my grandfather on my mother's side was black. His name was Ed Williams. My sisters, the other two sisters, one sister, my middle sister was Mary Williams, named after my father's mother. And my older sister, Louise, was a sister, my oldest sister, named after my father's sister. As a young person in Tulsa, I had a rich and rewarding life that I enjoyed. I was kind of a Tom Sawyer kind of a kid. My parents, when I was born, were in their 30s. I'm sure that by that time, they had their hands filled trying to get my younger sister through school. And although my mother had gone to what they called a finishing school and was eligible to teach school, she took a job as a maid to get my younger sister through school. And my father began work they did not allow blacks or Indians to lay brick at that time. But he was allowed to carry what they call carry hard. That was carrying the cement that they used to mix build the building with. That was the mortar for the building. And he maintained the job doing that for several years. Then thanks to my mother, who's a very outspoken person, she first formed the Black Democratic Women's Club in Tulsa. She was also instrumental in getting my father a job with St. Clair Oil Building as a custodian that he maintained until his demise. My mother passed when I was in the military. And I want to speak to a question that was asked, do I believe in a supreme being? At the time that I had finished my boot training, 350-something sailors were boarding a ship to go overseas. Their names were called, you saluted the flag, and you went up the ship. I can recall the time they called my name, Seaman First Class Robert J. Williams. And as I was about to board the gangplank, they called out that I had been scratched. I was the only sailor out of 365 or thereabouts who had been scratched from boarding the ship. And that really did trouble me for about a month. After a month's time, I was called in by the company commander and advised that my mother was ill. At the time, my sisters were residing in Los Angeles. That was just 60 miles away from Port Hueneme. They had called me, and I was allowed to go to Tulsa with them in a car to see my mother, who was hospitalized. It was about a 2 or 3 day trip by car. We got there at the hospital. We saw my mother. She raised her hand and she passed. I'm certain there was justification, godly justification, for my not having been a part of the journey that my fellow shipmates took. And I thank God for that. That was another occasion, too, that I can speak to. an acquaintance with the Creator. Again, I reference my stay in the Navy. I was on my first leave from basic training, and I was getting my shoes shined with a couple of other sailors. And a person, I felt that I had been there before. And I knew that what I could predict what was going to happen. And I have not shared this with everyone. But I felt that I was going to have a visit from someone. And immediately my cousin, I was in San Diego, my cousin and I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I had not seen him since I left to go into the military. He came by, he acknowledged me and I him. And we went, he said, I'm going to take you to see another cousin who was his sister. And I could tell him the name of the street before we left. It was on Linda Vista in San Diego. And we left there and went to visit his sister on Linda Vista Street in San Diego. So the Creator has been with me and spoken to me on several occasions. I can attest to that. And I'm appreciative of having that kind of communication. I felt that there was a liability that I did not want, but nevertheless it was there. It happened again when I was married, when my daughter had fallen off of her bike about a block or two away. And I was doing some work in my garage. This was in Lansing, Michigan. And I'm skipping about just now because this is what I moved to say. My daughter had fallen off of her bicycle and had injured herself. And there was no way that I could have known this other than by having been spiritually advised that she had fallen. I got out, I got in the car, went around to where she had fallen, picked her up, brought she and the bicycle back to the house. So that was one incident that occurred to me that I had to, and I had prayed not to have this as an ongoing gift, and I don't have it. Occasionally, I would be advised of something, but I didn't feel that I was strong enough to handle or to communicate ongoingly with that kind of a spirit. I've been fortunate in that when I was honorably discharged from the military, again, I'm referencing having been cared for. I left college after 4 years in 1950, and I had worked as a waiter while attending college. I worked as a waiter just to boost additional monies for whatever I chose to, and I saved a couple of $1,000s while there. I had entered school on the GI Bill, and that was sufficient, but I needed to work. And as I worked, I saved money, and I had invested in what was to have been among the first black newspapers in St. Louis, Missouri. I put $1,000 of my $2,000 that I had saved toward a newspaper that was to have been developed by my classmates. I had majored in graphic arts with a minor in journalism and art. And after I graduated from college in 1950, I went to Tulsa, Oklahoma for about 2 weeks. But I was aware that the likelihood of me being professionally employed there was not very likely. So I moved to St. Louis, Missouri. I was unsuccessful in the jobs that I had applied for there. But I took a test at the it was called the Workmen's Compensation Board at that time, the Labor Department. Took a test, and another guy and I were to have been the first blacks employed by the Universal Match Company, of all places in Ferguson, Missouri. Recently, in the past year thereabouts, Ferguson, Missouri has been in the newspaper. I was to have been the first black, another black guy and I, at Universal Match Company. We arrived at the Universal Match Company one morning early, and we were chauffeured into an office of the vice president. He welcomes us there, and the foreman took us into his office and explained that they were making an attempt to integrate the staff there, and that we were qualified with the credentials that were required. And we were just overjoyed to have been the other guy, to have been received. Well, about a half an hour or less into the interview, the foreman was interrupted. And he said, "I've got a problem, I'll be back shortly." He left and came back within about 10 minutes. He said, "I've been advised that they do not want to work with you." So we said, "Well, okay." He said, "Well, I want you to go home. I'm going to give you a full day pay, and we'll let you know when you can come back." When we were preparing to leave, we had to exit at a door where whites were lined up on both sides of this dirt road. The guy I was with was a guy from Louisiana, of my age, but much larger. And he was very afraid to go because he was afraid we were going to be attacked. I, for some reason, was not afraid. And I told him that's the only way we could get to the bus was to walk down that road. And just to be prepared and do not look either way, but just look straight ahead and the time go by. And we did that. I was confident, and I built confidence in him. We walked down that dirt road, and on both sides of the street, they were spitting on us, calling us names. We made it to the bus stop, boarded the bus, and went back to St. Louis. That was my first and last visit to Ferguson, Missouri. Because I was so disenchanted with the problems that I had encountered in St. Louis, I had read a magazine cover, and the cover had on it was the Ebony magazine, and it will always be etched in my memory. And it said on the cover, "Welcome to Cleveland, where racism is minimal." And I left the next day for Cleveland, Ohio in 1950. Arrived there in October and remained in Cleveland for 7 years, married there. My high school sweetheart came from Tulsa. We were married in Cleveland. In Cleveland, we had 2 sons. After 7 years in Cleveland, and I had worked in the post office in Cleveland again, although I had a degree, it was conscious to me that jobs that I had applied for, again, because of the pigmentation of my skin, I was unable to secure a job. So I applied for entrance into Western Reserve University. Western Reserve was a Jewish school. And I was advised by some friends of mine that it was going to be very difficult for me to get in because they required an entrance exam. That if I took the entrance exam, I would most likely fail, but I could take it again in 6 months. Well, I was fairly nervy. I took the entrance exam and I passed the first time. So I entered Western Reserve, and as I was at Western Reserve about 6 months. The tuition was very steep, and I had 2 children and a wife. And I learned that I could go to Kent State much more reasonable than to go into Western Reserve. I did well at Western Reserve. And I started going to Kent State. After 1 semester or less at Kent State, I was notified by a professor at Lincoln University, where I had graduated from, that there was a job opening in Lansing, Michigan, at Boys Vocational School. This was a reformatory. I went to that school and applied for the position. The position had been vacant for about 5 years, and there were only 2 other black teachers on staff. Out of a staff of about 24 teachers, 2 were black. Long story short, I became employed there and taught graphic arts and journalism. I stayed there for 10 years. I left there after 10 years, and I was also attending and working on my master's at Michigan State. I was a provisional teacher. I did not have certification on probation. I became certified within 18 months or thereabout, through credentials and credits that I received at Michigan State. I stayed there at Boys Training School for 10 years and applied for a job in Battle Creek. That's when President Johnson became president and had, at that time, what was labeled the Great Society. He was making an attempt to foster a culture where there was black mobility. And I acquired the job as the first black director of the Head Start program in Battle Creek, Michigan. I stayed there for 1 year, and by that time there was an opening in Lansing for the director of the anti-poverty program that also encompassed Head Start, legal aid, and other programs that were designed to be integral in an attempt to foster a better humanities among the culture, the black and white culture. It was a 4-county project: Ingham, East Clinton, and Shiawassee County. And I stayed in that position for 4 years. I left that position and became the first black director of a program that was designed to employ delinquent state wards throughout Michigan. I stayed there 4 years. I left that position and became one of the first to apply with 2 other fraternity brothers for a license to have a radio station. We acquired 25 acres of land in Diamonddale, Michigan. This was land that was what labeled non-permeable. That implied the land could not be built on. It could only be used to construct a tower to transmit radio frequency. And we called ourselves Diamond Broadcasting Company. At the time, the two other brothers and I, were well employed in state government. And we were fairly financially secure in that we had our own homes. And we went to the bank in order to secure, after we had been certified that we could apply for a radio frequency, we went to the American Bank and Trust, where I was acquainted with the president, Mr. Jim Herrick. And we applied for a loan. And he was able to document that we were eligible for a loan. And he would extend us a loan on the provision that if we secured all of the documents that we were entitled to, that we would not play any jungle music, as he labeled it, on our radio station. We left there very disenchanted and decided to go elsewhere to look for new monies. And it just so happens that the man who had assisted us, Mr. Munn, who was an engineer and locating the frequency for the radio station, had been very promising and devoted to assisting us. We acquired our license. And then we were advised that we could not use the land in Diamonddale. We were advised that they would not allow black people to construct a facility in that area. So we had a meeting that Mr. Munn arranged with the council members in Diamonddale. And this was the year that Elvis Presley had died, 1972 or 3 or thereabouts. So we had a meeting with the citizens of Diamonddale. And it was a replica, again, of Ferguson, Missouri. A very hostile crowd met us there. And we were advised that we explained to them that we did not want to live in Diamonddale, and that the land, the 25 acres that we had purchased, could not be inhabited, but only be used to build a radio tower. And we were advised that nevertheless, they would not allow us to do so. That if we put it up, they would take it down. So, with that in mind, we had to apply a different locality and pay more money for more land to build our tower. We left there, I'm referencing Diamonddale. It was a replica of Ferguson, Missouri, because again, people were lined up on both sides of the street. And thanks to Mr. Munn, the two of us had gone to speak in behalf of our intent to not to use the land, but to use it as a tower. We left there, and it was a replica of the incident in Ferguson, Missouri. I'm not a drinking person, alcohol, but I left there with Mr. Munn, and we stopped, and we had a drink of liquor, okay? And even with all of those barriers, Diamond Broadcast Station was able to succeed. We, in an attempt to placate our audience, we came to Atlanta, went to Washington, D.C., and were given our license. And we came to Atlanta, Georgia, and met with some persons. Ted Turner had started CNN, and this was an all-talk radio. So we said that we could placate Caucasians by not playing music, just by having a talk program. Because we were stigmatized, and the newspaper had labeled us having a black radio station, Our names had been publicized. Our advertising would not allow us, and the predominant advertisers were white. We had gone to the Cadillac dealer on one occasion and asked him for an ad. And he advised us that he would not give us an ad because he didn't have to, that they had sold, that they were the only Cadillac dealer in Lansing, and that blacks had to come there or go to Detroit to buy Cadillacs if they wanted one. So he would not give us an ad. But there were other businesses that did. But the businesses and the ads that we secured were not sufficient to sustain our radio station. We continued to invest our own monies in this station. And we continued to work toward getting a station. We were first an AM station. That limited your time of being on the air. It was from dawn till dusk. And because of the limited hours beginning in December, we were on just a very brief period of time. We acquired an AM and an FM license, and that was our salvation. Long story short, within a short period of time, we sold our radio station at a profit, a good profit, in an attempt to both, and I left my job from the state and became the first black director of our radio station. I was directing the radio station and teaching at Lansing Community College. I taught business at Lansing Community College for 3 years and maintained the radio station until we sold it. We sold the radio station, and by that time I had met my current wife. I lost my first wife of 23 years in 1973. Her name was Iva Fields. My first wife was of Indian extraction. Her grandmother was a full-blood Cherokee. And in 2008, my son inherited Indian land, 40 acres in Oklahoma. The land is in Berrien County. It's about 2 hours from Oklahoma City. That land has been in the family now since day one. At that time, when they were giving out land, parcels of land back to the Indians that they took, they gave them back 40 acres per person. Oklahoma, as you well know, was called the Sooner State. That was labeled because when you took effort to secure land, the sooner you got to the place that you wanted to stake out, that was declared your land. The exception was to some of the Indians, they gave out land ahead of time, gave them 40 acres of land. And my son inherited that land that had been in our family. I was in the military for a year. I was stationed at Port Hueneme, California. I mentioned earlier that Port Hueneme, California was 60 miles from Los Angeles. I consider that a godly intervention, that I was able to leave the camp where I was and just travel for about an hour and a half by bus to be with my sisters who were in Los Angeles, and travel by car to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where my mother was hospitalized, and spend about an hour with her before she passed. I need to go back now and share the experience with my current wife. I mentioned that my first wife, her name was Lois Iva Jean Fields. That was her maiden name. She passed in 1973. My current wife, her husband passed. She was a widow. And at the school where I first had my first teaching job, her brother, Robert Little, it just so happens that her brother, Robert Little, was the baby brother of Malcolm X. I did not know at the time that she was the sister of Malcolm X. I did not meet her, but I knew her brother, Robert Little. He and I became very good friends. He was a counselor, what we had in common, and I was a student at Michigan State, and so was he. He went on to get his MSW in social work, and I acquired an advanced degree in Michigan State. And our friendship lasted over the years. After I lost my first wife, he was the first person at my home to wish to bring condolences. And he was also, I began work under his administration. He became the first black director of the Office of Children and Youth Services. And after I left working for the anti-poverty program, I became a manager of the program that I was administering in employment services under him, but Robert Little. And from time to time, he was insistent that I meet his sister, Ruby. She had lost her husband. Ruby and I met, just a casual meeting, and I didn't think anything about it, nor did she. And I met her again on another occasion. Long story short, we became acquainted. And Ruby is a very bright lady. Ruby had 4 children. And Ruby did not go to college until she was 28 years of age. Ruby took 4 children to Michigan State for several years until she acquired her first degree. She went on to Michigan State until she acquired a PhD in education. She taught school. She also became employed by the Michigan Education Association. After she stayed there for several years, she moved. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge our children. Ruby has 4 children. She has a son, Paul King, who is currently in Atlanta as a neurosurgeon. She has a daughter here, Gail King, who is employed in a professional position at the Salvation Army. She has another daughter in Detroit, Michigan, who is a retired educator, Cynthia King, and another daughter, Carol King, who is working for the senior citizen staff in Florida. I have 2 children. I have a son, Broderick Benjamin Williams, who is a principal at Sexton High School in Lansing, Michigan, and I have a retired daughter, Ida Michelle Williams, in Lansing, Michigan. I need to thank StoryCorps for allowing me to be a participant in this discussion. Thank you so much.